Produced by Ranting Rhino Productions, Praxis Pedagogy exists to position our teaching and learning practice within different methodologies. We want to construct a guild of educators dedicated to designing a difference in our own teaching and learning and in our students' experience. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Praxis Pedagogy podcast. It's been a while since we've touched base with each other. We've had some holidays come into the fray. We've had some extenuating circumstances that have just been gobbling up all of our time. But this episode is so cool because we were blessed with the opportunity to have Jeanie Cockell and Joan McArthur-Blair join us on the podcast. So we sat down and we talked about the book a little bit. We talked about their experiences in leadership in higher education, and specifically, we wanted to talk about chapters 5 and 6. So we touched on that a little bit. And then about halfway through the episode, they had to leave, which was totally cool. And then the three of us, Sally, Lucy, and I, continued on the conversation of chapter 5 and chapter 6. So we hope you really enjoy this episode, and a big shout out and a big thank you again to Jeanie and Joan for taking time out of their life to come and be a part of this podcast. We loved it. We love your book. We hope you enjoy this episode. Catch you on the other side. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Praxis Pedagogy Podcast. It's been a minute since we've released an episode. It's been a while. Some of us have been on holidays. Some of us have been working our tails off because, you know, COVID's changing and the restrictions are being lifted. We're all cheering about that. And pretty soon, Lucy, I think we'll be able to see each other face to face. We haven't seen each other in, 2 years?
Yeah, it's been nearly 2 years. Yeah, and Sally too, I think. Well, and yeah. So yeah, I know. I've never met Chad in the flesh. We connected through, COVID, through just having this common goal and common ideas, and so crazy.
Yeah, one of the few.
One of the few. Oh, here we go. I'm so excited. I don't know. I'm sure Sally, Lucy, you're excited too. We have some very special guests with us today because everyone knows we've been going through Appreciative Inquiry in Higher Education, second edition, A Transformative Force by Jeanie Cockell and Joan McArthur-Blair. And it is, I don't know. I can't say it enough. It's just an absolute pleasure to have the both of you with us on our podcast. Your book is amazing and all that. And I'm sitting in awe. I'm just so happy to see you both. And for those of you who don't know what was going on before this, there was a whole bunch of talking going on and I wanted to grab it. So before we started, but let me ask the first question and then we'll just get into it and we'll see what happens. So Jeanie and Joan, you were talking before off air a little bit about the book before this one. That's an expansion of a chapter. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I have something to say first. I am so happy to be here because I've been listening to your podcast and it's really amazing to listen to people take ideas you put on paper and play with them. It is like the thing that makes an author come to life, to listen to other people chat about their ideas and play with them. And so I'm really excited to be here. And of course, really excited to be here because I know all three of you and spent a big part of my career, of course, at Vancouver Community College. And so it's amazing to be with you. So I wanted to say that first.
Oh, ditto. I mean, I just fell in love with you all listening to your podcast because you are just so engaged and excited. And I did what Joan says about it makes us just feel like, well, maybe it was worth all that work we did writing this book. And we're so passionate about higher ed and appreciative inquiry and to bring it actually into, which we think is just such a powerful, and that's our work, right? Yeah. Well, some of our work, but really we love working with higher ed institutions and seeing it happen and people going, whoa, and just kind of turning themselves over their head over heels. And you've told some stories about that in your podcast, about how that's happened to you. And so that's just really exciting for us.
Oh,
I feel honored by you.
Oh, well, thank you.
How we
I've got some great co-hosts.
Yeah, the three of you are great.
How we got to the Building Resilience with Appreciative Inquiry book, which was published after the first edition of Appreciative Inquiry in Higher Education, is it really came from a lifelong fascination with what allows us as human beings, as leaders, as educators, to be resilient in the day-to-day of our lives. And so you'll see that, and particularly tonight's topic in the Chapter 5 Alive model, this notion of utilizing strengths in that appreciative inquiry way to focus on a resilience practice. But we were fascinated by this, and we wanted to talk to leaders about being resilient. And so the Building Resilience with Appreciative Inquiry book is really about, within the context of appreciative inquiry, how do you cultivate hope in a hopeful view? How do you use your strengths in times of despair or in times of challenge? And how do you undertake the will to forgive when you find yourself in those places where you can't manifest what you want, or you can't fit within the system at the moment? And so that second book was a powerful piece of work for us in talking to leaders about resilience. And for me, I've been fascinated with resilience for years and years and years. But why don't you tell a story about how, as we worked with the first edition of Appreciative Inquiry in Higher Education, lots of people came to us after workshops we did on Appreciative Inquiry to talk with us about resilience kinds of issues.
Well, because as we used the book that you've read, the first edition over the years, and we realized that there was a level at which people were getting to, and they said, does this always happen? This kind of thing about beyond the, strategic planning or team building or academic planning or whatever it was we were doing with departments in higher education, especially. I mean, we work with other organizations, but that's our predominant clientele. And they were really talking about being different and being able to move on in whatever challenges because there's always challenges. And it's about being able to move on with their lives, to be resilient. And we thought, wow, there's something here to be taking appreciative inquiry into the resilience world, and we called it appreciative resilience. And now that's a big chunk of our work that actually employs all of the things that are in the book that you've been reading and broadens it to a bigger spectrum, because the leaders we interviewed, some were higher education leaders and many weren't. So we brought it to the world rather than setting it in a particular context of higher ed.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can just add to that, not only have you brought it to the world, you've made it so accessible, as in the language that you use and the authenticity that just like ripples throughout the whole book, makes it so accessible. It doesn't feel like it's something, that some other people have been able to perfect this style of leadership. I think this speaks to so many people on so different levels, no matter where they are in that leadership journey. And I love that you identify leaders. As a friend of mine, actually, Kathleen Bortland, she talks about I leaders and these little I leaders all throughout higher education. And so some of the most incredible leadership is in the hands of those that don't carry the title, and they don't have it. And you speak to this as well. And that's what really, really, I guess I'm just absolutely loving about it, that this isn't about a fix it. This isn't a book on leadership that's all about fixing things. It's about a leadership journey, and it's not a short-term journey. Like, I love that your stories span like many, many years and many different experiences.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry. I just wanted to say that I agree with the stories piece. That really it laid a lot of me. Nothing in this book is prescribed. It's come to you through your experience, through your stories, and I think that's why it means so much to us, because it's lived experience. and it's stuff that you've learned through that. And that's what appreciative inquiry is. I mean, it's not something you can just do and turn on and off at a meeting or at a conference or through a project. It's lived, and you practice that through the book. I think that's why it's so powerful. That's why it's so powerful to me. Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that we structured chapter 6 around a series of leadership questions. Is that, I think in some ways, it's not necessarily easy, but we want to attach to those, steps, those things I can do by next Tuesday. And the more and more Jeanie and I study leadership and write on leadership, the more we find power in questions that allow leaders to reflect on what they can do and might do, what they might think. Because we think in those deep questions is that well of strength that leaders work. And Sally, you were talking about, how we're inclusive of leaders. And both Jeanie and I profoundly believe that leader really is defined by anyone who is willing to work in the service of others, regardless of what it says on their business card, that those people lead organizations.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at Vancouver Community College, I was called a shit disturber. I was proud of that. I think I was a department chair at the time.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never been called that, ever.
Right.
Oh, man.
I mean, one of the things I love about the culture of BCC, and Joan, I can't let this moment pass. As you know, you were, I've told you this story before, but you were my first instructor in the PIDP program. And it was in Courtney. And I think it was back in like 97. And I was absolutely terrified. I was a new adult immigrant to Canada, new to teaching, and I didn't understand a word that was going on in the class about curriculum, pedagogy. And I remember it was confluent objectives. And I think you have to be the most patient person on this earth, because you tried every way possible to help me grasp what this concept was. And then in the end, you said, I'm going to ask everybody, does anybody in this class have an idea how maybe they could help Sally understand this? And they did. Somebody started talking about the rivers when the tributaries joined together. But the thing that I'm mentioning this for is because that's I read the part about, having these ghosts that walk with you, that you've been pivotal in changing their lives. And I think about that moment, because had you not been there, and I mean, there's other fabulous instructors that change lives every day, but this is why we need to be so mindful, so reflective, and really to the level of metacognitive reflection, not just glancing back, because we do hold people's lives. We can transform their lives, or we can actually put a real sort of hard line in front of them. And so I think this is why, again, your work is so valuable, and reading this, having access to your experiences, is incredible.
Yeah, I would round that out by saying that chapter 6 has been probably one of the best chapters for me. I love leadership and studying leadership for a long time, been leading for a long time, leading poorly for a long time, and then was first introduced to an appreciative inquiry approach back in my master's degree at Royal Roads, and came across Shine's work of humble inquiry, and then of course dove into Greenleaf's servant leadership, and those things just kind of melded for me. And then when I came across your definition for leadership in chapter 6, I'm going to start using that in courses that I teach, because up to this point, I've been saying, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And, the old adage that if no one's following you, you're not really leading, right? But I really loved your perspective on leadership, and that it's a service, right? And that we're doing this role, not just for the greater good, but for those in the good, and being of service to them. And that really resonated with me. So I wanted to say a big thank you for including that in chapter 6, because it was just one more of those, aha, I'm on the right track. I'm on the right path. This is confirming for me a lot of things that I already feel inside in my own value system when it comes to leading and serving others. So just wanted to add that and say thank you for putting that in your book.
Well, and this idea that, leadership is not for the faint of heart. It's not easy. It's complex and challenging and wonderful and magnificent in 60-second increments. And so, Tim, you talk about, your own study of leadership. Mine is the same. It's like a lifetime of study. Resilience and leadership, those two things. I think on the day before I die, I'm still going to be asking myself questions about what are these things, and how is it that people undertake this work?
And for me, the notion of being present and authentic, and that's when you talk about the stories and when our writing, sometimes it feels kind of scary. And when I, reread it and go, wow, yeah, oh my God, did we actually tell this? But I think that has to be prominent in our interrelations with each other, is that we actually are who we are, and we tell those stories from those perspectives, because that allows other people to be fully present in that way of interacting with each other. And so then you can lead together because you're there, right? People are there. And whether it's in the classroom leading students, or whether it's with colleagues, or whatever it is, if you don't actually act in an authentic way where you're fully present with your stories, because stories really reach people. And that's what Appreciative Inquiry is founded on too. It's founded on stories, right? It's a narrative approach to inquiry, right? But it's a narrative approach that looks at appreciating what is, whatever that is, the good, the best, the better, whatever, but it also means the challenges, right? Appreciating that, all of those too. It doesn't let go of any of that. I love what you did with critical AI in chapter 4. Like, you really got it, because that's a real passion of ours too, is the whole notion of, especially in these times with anti-racism and all various things, 215 children's bodies were found in Kamloops, right? This is a huge piece of our world that is finally coming to the fore, that we have to actually appreciate what has happened in order to make a significant difference, not just words, but to act in relationship to that, to make a better world. I think that's what all of us are about, is really to make a better world.
Mm-hmm. And your vulnerability comes through as well. I think, in keeping with that acknowledging, and as you say, that right now with the recent, findings at Kamloops and these 215 children's bodies that have really, the Indigenous people said, we didn't need this evidence. We knew all along. The difference is now, this is what's happening right now. And I think that for me, one of the things is that your book, Appreciative Inquiry, actually allows me to cope in these situations in a way. And just like you said, asking questions. And when I say cope, it's not as if I know what to do now, but it's like, okay, in the situations where you have no prior experience, you don't know what to do, this, learning this, it's a way of being that seems so human. So it's leadership and humanity coming together with these values. And I think that that's what for me keeps growing throughout the book. You haven't identified the values and said, these are the values, they're core values, we're going to put those to the front, and then sort of lost sight of them. They just keep growing as you get further through the book. I do have a question though, if that's okay. Just a quick question. So I know you mention I think in chapter 5 and chapter 6, there's sort of mention of those moments where you know it's been difficult to have that positive outlook. Do you recall, like maybe going back 20 years, do you recall sort of the sort of the process you had to go through, that self-reflection, that metacognition, to stop those negative or those, you know, those assumptions coming to the front first before you had to then say, whoa, hang on a minute, let's look at where's the strength here?
Yes, I still do that practice, because that's what we call this resilience of practice, appreciative inquiry practice, appreciative outlook of practice. Because let me tell you, over the last year, you know, I've been practicing that a lot. So it's not something that, you know, 20 years ago I learned to do and now I can do it. It's like, well, you learn a lot all the time. You're constantly learning and relearning, and you know, it's like the whole venturing and evolving. You're always evolving, but underneath that is a constant practice of catching yourself and saying, wait a minute now, can I reframe here? Can I look at, you know, like last year when all of our we travel a lot to do stuff all over the place, and suddenly we weren't going to San Diego in April. So what were we going to do instead? Well, that was a training. That was an appreciative inquiry facilitator training, which we love to do. And so we said, well, what could we do? Well, we could do what we've been wanting to do with the company of experts, Center for Appreciative Inquiry, who hire us to actually make it virtual. But we've never got around to doing that and so Joan and I offered to be the content folks, and we're just writing an article that's going to be in the next Appreciative Inquiry Practitioner Journal. No, it's in the November one, coming up right in November. And writing about that whole experience last year of doing that. We worked so hard all last summer. You know, we're old ladies here and we're having to reinvent in our heads. You know, oh my God, to learn the Zoom, the learning management system.
I love it. I love it. And I love that you say that, because Lucy, Tim and I and Chad, our other friend that joins us from time to time, or he did before he nipped over to Medicine Hat College there. But we talk, we talk about these kind of things, you know, on a regular basis. And I think that just having you here, having you in this conversation is just going to really, I think it does give us, you know, hope of that constant evolving, like with COVID, with the challenges of COVID. And it's so many strengths have come out of it. It seems like those of us that have actually had this experience, I think that, not that you would wish the pandemic on anybody, but the opportunity that's come out of it has been huge. And one of the things that keeps coming forward is we've talked about it a lot, is Prensky's notion. I forget what his name was. Is it Dan Prensky, who was the digital immigrants and digital natives, and speaking about that. And you know, my husband came up with the whole idea the other day about, he said, being a digital being is being willing to be a landed immigrant in the digital world. And I love that you say, you know, there you were learning Zoom and putting together these workshops, because this is part of this evolving and growing and not limited by what you've done before, having the mindset that, you know, encourages you to change those ways.
And when we developed the Alive model, that looks at appreciate, love, inquire, and venture and evolve, we spend a lot of time on this idea of venturing and evolving, that we actually don't know in life what will happen. You know, we can undertake those first three things: to appreciate, to love and inquire, in order to venture and evolve. But we don't know where that actually is going. We don't know what that will be. And in our resilience work, particularly recently, we've been writing a fair bit about, sometimes you just have to abide in the challenge. It's not like you can make it go away. You just have to kind of use your daily strengths to abide in your challenge for a while. Like I often jokingly say that, despair is like a bad house guest. It comes, it lives in your house, eats your food, doesn't do their laundry, is a slob, and refuses to leave. And sometimes, we just have to abide in those really challenging times. We don't get to say, oh, it's going to go away, or I'm going to make it go away, because it actually doesn't. And so we need that strength to stay in that place with it.
And COVID has provided us that challenge worldwide. And so it's been a phenomenal learning experience and not very easy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. Before I'm going to get, I feel so starstruck. Like I don't want to talk because I just want to listen to Jeanie and Joan talk.
Lucy has
like
never been this quiet.
No, I'm just looking at you both like, oh, I just want to get into your heads, like into your minds. I just think there's so many things that pop up, like when you've been talking and when you were talking about Chad and we were talking about leadership and a lot of chapter 6 kind of, it reminds me of that conversation because we were talking about just kind of revisioning where we are. It's so messy right now. It can be so messy. And he asked me, what is your highest point of contribution? And think about that. And you can really then realign, where you stand, what has always followed you. He asked me this, he was like, what has always followed you in your jobs as a department head, as a skin therapist, as an instructional associate, as a friend, as a colleague, as a mum, what has always followed you? And when people say, oh, you're a natural leader, it's like, no, there's nothing natural about it. Like it's hard freaking work. But you really have to just, be able to, there has to be certain values that flow through you in order for you to find that piece of light as you're moving forward. And, when you talk in chapter 6 about leadership, darkest nights and what can be your greatest strengths, like I really think that people should be asking themselves, like, these types of questions and what you bring, because, when I try and explain this concept to people that have never really heard of it, they see me as an optimist. So they're like, oh, well, you always see that the glass is half full. You're an optimist. Like, your outlook on life is very optimistic. And I couldn't work through that project and actually get through it. And sometimes it is very difficult. You could be very innovative and you could be very creative and optimistic, but bringing people with you is the hardest thing. For me, it sometimes can be the hardest thing to do, to just make them realize that, that there is so much beauty and hope and things that we can gather. And so I just felt like I just had to say that, because so much of what you talk about in your experiences and your points, like they just resonate so deep. And I think, like, they are really needed now. And I think people that work in our circles really need to pick up this book for those reasons, to remind themselves, like, why they're doing it, and their lived experience will help them through, some of these darkest nights. So it's pretty epic. So yeah, I am being quiet, but I just think don't want to use up your time, because you're just like listening to hearing about your thoughts. It's amazing.
Oh, and Lucy, you were saying how you could see me when I said I was a shit disturber. I can see you, because we just live, and we're kind of surprised that other people don't live like this in some ways. I mean, I don't know whether you're like that, but I'm kind of like that. So, but it is a practice. Like I have some of my lowest to my lows, and I have to get up and have a practice of, well, how do I shift that? Because I know how to do this. And I love the notion of what you say is you have your core values, right? That's what you're living around. So it's keeping in touch with those that keeps us going, right? There's people that look like optimists and, all that kind of stuff, but, we are, and we practice it, right? I'm sure you do. You practice it. You inquire into that. You're fascinated by this book because you're
you're my people. This is the same thing.
Exactly. Yes, you're my people. Yeah.
And that question, what follows you, right? And, Sally was telling a story earlier about me and her in a classroom, right? And it is one of the things for me as a leader. I mean, I got to do one of everything in higher education, from faculty to president to consultant now, and just have lived the grandest life. But what follows me is every once in a while, I had a moment of leadership that actually impacted somebody else's life. And if I'm really lucky, I get to hear that moment. And you think you wish for that for every single leader in higher education. That somebody comes along and says, you know what? A whack of years ago, you said something to me. And so that's so powerful in leadership and the practice of leadership, that every once in a while, something follows you. And that is extraordinary. And sometimes it's things we never think follow us.
Mm-hmm. And then follows you, but also ripples out from you. Because that's the other piece here, isn't it, as well? That, I think that like Tim, Lucy, and I, what we're learning even from your book, not even from your book, from your book, will ripple out in our practice. The same as Joan, when I first met you, the way you shaped my understanding of what it meant to teach and what it meant to learn probably, most likely has shaped my whole teaching career. And so that's the other, piece of the puzzle, that there'll be many lives that you've really had influence on, and many of those folks you would never even know. But, I think, like you say, that is of value, and that's so different. That's so different to ego, because I think there's, when we think about ego and leadership and a different model of leadership, when someone has held sort of power, and I don't know what it feels like to hold power, to be quite honest, although I do recognize that as a white female, that I hold a level of privilege, and that is power. But in the higher education world, I've never held that title of power or wanted to hold a role that was transactional. But I wonder what that feels like. I mean, we're talking about here the ripple out effect on influence on people's lives, those people that that you may have worked around significant barriers for them and had provided them with pathways where education has changed their lives. But I wonder what it feels like if you're in a transactional leadership role, and you do speak about this slightly, but maybe you could add a little bit more about it, when budgets are severely cut, and we may see that within the next couple of years with the current financial situation for higher education, I think all across the country, but maybe globally. And when you have to make cuts that do cause major significant roadblocks for students. Have you been in those kind of situations, and what would you say about, your core values there, where those actions have got consequences for many people?
You want to answer first? You want me to?
Well, I was just thinking about how you can shift the conversation, because my experience in administrative roles in higher ed have been that people don't actually talk about the budget in an open and honest way, right? And sometimes you just have to get that shift happening, because I remember at Vancouver Community College, I brought in my magic wand. Remember my magic wand? It actually doesn't exist anymore, because in that car accident, got so badly bashed, eventually had to give it up. But the magic is really just shifting people and allowing them to be fully present with each other and authentically present. That's magic, right? And sometimes you just bring something silly into a budget meeting, which I did, and let the vice president of finance use it, because I said, well, it will help with this meeting to get people to actually talk to each other. People started to laugh and then just kind of let go and said, okay, then what are we really talking about here? So it's really just like being in any situation when you're working with people, to have them connect to one another authentically. I think that's the starting place in any sort of tough budget situation, is to just honestly and to have people talk about it in terms of what it really is, rather than arguing, I want this much and you can't have that much because you had that much last time, and silly stuff, right? They need to actually be much more authentic about what it means to do this, and what other alternatives, what are the opportunities? I mean, like COVID, the opportunities were, well, we would go online more or something, right? Well, these are all possibilities that we haven't, well, we tried before, we'd done Zoom and stuff before, but we had never done it to this level, right? And so we were lucky because we had the privilege of having a background. We work from home as well as travel. So for us, it really wasn't that big a deal as some people, right, who had to leave their institutions and then take up something totally new. But in budget and tough times, I think that appreciative inquiry approach of, just really working with people to say, be authentic together and say what you really need. And sometimes it's just a little laughter as you get started into it, and not take it so seriously.
Well, and I think in leadership, it's not written about very much, and it's not something I've written about very much because I haven't kind of managed to wrap my mind around it. But I think one of the complexities of leadership is when you arrive at the day that you realize you're about to betray somebody you deeply care about. And by betray, I mean, like, you're not going to lie to them, none of that.
Yeah.
But they look to you as someone who would take them someplace on a journey along with them, working with them. And if you have to turn to them and say, you can no longer be at the institution because of budget reasons, fundamentally as a leader, you've chosen the institution over the individual, which, is kind of part of that whole leadership thing. But that is a deep leadership reckoning. When you realize that space you're in as a leader, and that you actually, regardless of your principles and values, cannot keep everybody safe. Mm-hmm. That you cannot care for each individual always. And that's a deep reckoning for leadership. And I think it's a deep reckoning, and it's not the same kind of reckoning that some individual is going through that suddenly is without work, right? I mean, one is kind of a philosophical reckoning, and one is like, you just sent me home. And so I think to not ever forget that individuals are being impacted by budgets. And so it's really complex, I think, that space of leadership around budgeting and making choices and those kinds of things. And it's not simple work. And every time I've had to do it in my career, I reminded myself that the decisions I made were impacting individuals and families. And was I really having to make this decision? So anyway, we should go.
The human dimension. This is the human dimension, really, is what we're talking about. I think that's what Appreciative Inquiry brings in. I mean, there's all sorts of tools and trips to leading and all that, and organizing and all that. But the focus on really listening to the stories, really focusing on the human dimension of what can shift people and organizations, as individuals, as groups, whatever. I think that is the piece within all of these other things that we often, as I was trying to say, we lose touch with this human dimension when we're in budget meetings or whatever. But we also lose touch of, okay, acts, because this has to go, because that, as Joan was saying, well, but yes, you have to keep in touch with those people in the sense of what can we do to support and care, right? This is the love part of the Alive model, right? Appreciate love. And the love we found is so many people have attached to that because it's a 4-letter word that we don't actually use very much, because it's like, what? Love? Going to talk about that in an organization. So, but that love word is about the support of each other, a love of self, of others, that human dimension of no matter what we're going through, what those challenges are, what is it we are caring for, and how do we get cared for ourselves? So that's our passion, isn't it, Joan?
It is.
Well, you certainly have brought the magic and the hope to this conversation, just as we anticipated you would. Really is.
So we're going to leave you and let you.
No.
Let Tim have his first question. I mean, let him get in here.
Tim had a first question we never got to, right?
No, it's okay. It's the way it goes. I do a lot of listening and a lot of reflecting. Joan and Jeanie, thank you again so much for taking your time out of your life to be here with us to share in this conversation. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your book. You have impacted a lot of people, the three here notwithstanding. And I know that as we continue to practice this framework, you will impact others through our work. And one thing that came to mind is, as you were talking about the leadership and the complexity of it, is I think as quote unquote good leaders, we strive to have an impact and an influence, and we try to do that through servant leadership and through humility. And I think sometimes people mistake our driving and our striving to take the stage, rather than we drive and we strive so we can sit in the front row and watch others. Right. And that's something that I have a hard time communicating to others as I drive and strive in my leadership roles and try to balance the relationship and the humanity with the FTE numbers and, and that hard reality that sometimes faces us when we have to make those tough decisions. And I don't know if anybody can really understand those situations until they've been in it. And I know through your work and through the work that we're doing at each of our institutions, we're trying to communicate that. And so I'm not going to speak for Lucy and Sally, but I'm going to say on behalf of the podcast, thank you so much for this book. It's a pleasure to read. Sometimes it pokes in the heart, which I think is good. And it gives us a bit of a kick in the butt, which is good too. And I use this word intentionally. We love you both for the work that you do. We love this book for the impact that it's having. And we hope that you will continue giving to the community so that we can continue to learn with you as you continue on. So thank you for taking the time.
And thank you. And we hope you read our Building Resilience book with Appreciative Inquiry.
It's on my list.
And just on that note, I thought I would leave you with a poem that comes out of this book, the Resilience book.
Joan's poems start every chapter. And Joan is a wonderful poet.
And this is particularly for you, Lucy, and this notion of being an optimist. Right? My beautiful friend, Hope, you point me toward the sun, you shelter me in the rain, you trumpet my successes and hold me in my sorrow, ever whispering, rise up, rise up. Because that's what that optimism is saying to people. And you as a leader say, people, rise up, come with me, rise up. So folks, we're going to leave you. This has been amazing. We love your podcast.
I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to cry in this. I wasn't going to cry, but needed to hear that this week. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Tim, Lucy, and Sally. You are amazing to be able to carry on this work. I mean, as you say, it amplifies. We just got to all do this. We all got to get this work out there. It's wonderful.
And we're big fans of your podcast. Yeah. So we can't wait to what you do next after you finish this book. We're
really saying that.
We're fans now. So, we're working up here.
Okay, good deal. Good deal. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.
Bye.
And so it's at this point that Jeanie and Joan left the podcast, and we are so thankful for them being a part of the show and all the insights that they brought, and we just loved our conversation with them. So now, after this break, we continue on. Lucy, Sally, and I continue on talking about Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, but this could be an opportunity for you to tell us what you would want to hear on the podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'd love it if you'd pass the word on to others about this podcast, and feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you think. Perhaps you know someone who might want to be a guest on the show, or topics you would love us to dive into and spend some time together within those topics. So thanks again for listening, and you can contact us through the website, praxispedagogy.com, or you can catch us on the socials. Will be listed in the show notes. Thanks very much. Now for the rest of the show. Okay, cry time.
Oh, beautiful. So inspiring. Absolutely so inspiring.
Yep.
And I know in life things find you when you need them, but oh my goodness, you know, one thing we didn't really get around to, one thing that I was going to mention is how I first connected with this book. And it was quite simply, it was the first 100 copies were being, I think it was on LinkedIn or something.
Yeah.
And I clicked it, and I remember we were chatting about what you're reading, and I think I was halfway through the first chapter, and I knew that I needed the hard copy of this book. And it's almost, do you remember me saying a few, it was like 3 or 4 podcasts ago, and I said, Appreciative Inquiry is like a gift, not literally a gift, but a philosophical gift. And I think now, honestly, for people in your life, people that you see starting their careers in, higher education, and you watch them trying to navigate different systems, this could be the welcome gift, Just dig into this as your career continues here, and I guarantee you're going to find something that's going to help you navigate the systems.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that notion, Sally. That's such a good idea. And when Tim was talking too about, driving the bus, and I just feel like, it's such a good point too, because that's what I don't like. People say, oh, you trailblaze in this, or you do. I'm like, no, I just drive the bus and let everyone off and go, drive the bus, open the doors so that they, so that people can, figure stuff out. But any way that you can kind of support and help others just be better, do better, like that's right. You don't need the stage. You just want to be in the front row watching those people just do great things and be incredible. And I love that.
Yeah. I think for me, I put the new bus route in. I'm definitely the grassroots, kind of leadership. And I know there's buses taking folks everywhere, but it's kind of like where there's no bus going there. There's these folks that are, and that's kind of, I think where I see that opportunity and optimism, and just recognizing those strengths. But it's interesting. It's interesting to hear Jeanie say that she too has to keep reframing. My day started at 6 this morning, and I've got a workshop that I'm delivering tomorrow morning at 6:30 to Kenya. And and about 10 minutes into it,
Ali, was that Kenya? Kenya, you said.
Did I mention Kenya? Yeah,
Kenya.
I might have mentioned it. Yeah. Yeah. Just so you know. But about 10 minutes into it, I had to go and get a book or something from somewhere else. And I found myself thinking, oh my goodness, why am I so slow at doing all of this stuff? This is taking me forever. And then I'm just like, isn't it incredible that these projects provide opportunities to learn new stuff every time, which is obviously going to take more time than stuff that you've done before, and just catching yourself. And I just think that's one of those, surrounding yourself by people that do acknowledge, yes, this is tough. This is going to be challenging, but yet like having the chance of reframing.
Yeah, I really like that. And one of the things that I got out of chapter 5 was the shaped by suffering. And Sally, this is kind of what you're talking about in regards to having to learn stuff and build all these workshops. And, none of it comes easy. Like, we may know certain parts of it and we nail it down, but, to put the whole thing together, that's a lot of work. We're doing it all, mostly on our own. And, it's on our shoulders to not only build it, but then deliver it and all the peripherals that go with that. Right. And every time we do those things, there's a certain level of suffering that's involved in that, right? Whether it's mental, intellectual, spiritual, sometimes physical, because you're staying up late, getting up early, you're doing all the hard work. But that's really where the learning is, isn't it? I mean, that's really where you not only learn more material, but I think more importantly, you learn about yourself, and you start. And this is what I really love about doing stuff like that is I begin to learn where my boundaries really are. And then I'm encouraged to push and then to push my boundary and push it a bit more and expand it and push and grow. Do I get tired? Yeah. Come on. We're all tired, right? But we are, right? Yes. But there's parts of me that go, you know what? This has got to get done. Buckle down, do it. And sure enough, you learn stuff through that.
But, and like you just said about the boundaries, or don't do it. That's the other piece, isn't it, as well? I think that is a strength, realizing what is of value, what is worth getting up for at 6 a.m. and staying up late for, and recognizing, like you say, it is a lot of work if you haven't done that before. And yet, if you can see through that, yes, but I don't want to keep doing things that I've done before. Like, you're energized by doing these different things, but by doing different things, even though you're energized by them, they're going to take a lot of energy to do as well, aren't they?
Yeah, right. And that's where you do the ROI. You do the quick ROI on this and go, is it worth my time to do this? Mm-hmm. Is it worth me getting into it? Knee deep, sometimes neck deep, and that's the beauty of it, is that you're like, okay, I'll do this. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it, but I'll do it. And at the end of it, you look back and you go, I love that experience, mm-hmm. and can't wait for the next one.
That sounds like a PhD.
There we go.
Well,
but I think too, though, one of the things, and it is that, you have a good team of collaborators that you work with, you find your people that push you along. So, and I think people that are trying to do it on their own and be a standalone person, that's where the exhaustion comes in, because, it's hard when you're just trying to, be everything yourself. And it's hard to find people that are like-minded and people that can help pursue your ideas, to pursue what you're doing, or even say, like what you said, Sally, to say, these are your boundaries. Like, you don't need to go here like this, and help to kind of, when you're in the thick of something, it's really hard for you to kind of really reframe. And mm-hmm. so that's super important to have that. And that's something that I've really, found to be, really great for me this year is, and through COVID is really, I think this type of suffering, like what you talk about, Tim, and stuff that we've been through, like it makes you find your people. Right. It's always darkest for the dawn. And I really think that's happened this year.
Mm-hmm.
Nice Batman reference there. I love that. That's good. You see, way to harness that one in, girl. I love that.
I think the toughest times are, though, when you can't find your people.
Yeah.
Like if if you're in an institution and you work with, your daily work, it's with like-minded people, and that they, you're all sort of driving the bus in a similar direction, or you're not actually, competing with each other or have conflicting goals. But I think that, the darkest times are when you really are, working in isolation. And sometimes it's, it's not intentional, and it's not because you're not a team player. It's just whatever you're working on isn't, it's not meant to be collaborative, and maybe it's difficult. And I think that really that whole appreciative inquiry piece there that speaks to that. Like when you first find yourself really delving in, deep, it was Tim, you said up to the neck in this sort of situation. And I know I was joking a minute ago about a PhD, but I mean, anybody that's been on that kind of journey, you're 6 years into it. You've spent a lot of that time on your own, and a lot of that time you feel really vulnerable because you are vulnerable. And I just think that this whole philosophy of appreciative inquiry, and the more you can live it and embody that whole philosophy, is going to be there when you need it, because it's no good running to solve that feeling with it, is it? It's just like being more prepared. But I'm hooked on the idea of this being the gift, the new employee. Welcome to the world of, higher ed.
Exactly. Hey, are you guys doing any kind of reflective practice?
Let me reflect on that. No, I really do think that I've just started to do a little bit more reflective practice. I feel now that things for me have just started to calm a bit through me understanding, my role at work and the kids kind of getting into a bit of more of a routine because COVID just kind of, messed it all up. So it was about everyone else for the longest time. And I think with reflective practice, you can't force it. It has to come. So, I've started to do different things and different activities where I can really start to reflect, take some time, and talk to people a bit more deeply rather than just hurrying through things. And just like what we just discussed earlier, it's a practice. It's something you have to keep working on, right? So I'm working on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I would say I'm going to give a shout out here to Catherine McNaughton. My path crossed. It's too funny because Jeanie and Joan's book was on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure that's where I found it. And I think Catherine McNaughton, for those of you listening that don't know Catherine, she's actually used to be the VP academic at BCC. Is that correct, Lucy?
Yeah, she was much more than that, but that was her title. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, much more than that. Yeah. But she's also a professional coach, and it's been, I think, one of the highlights of, it's an incredible experience. I've been working with Catherine now, I think, since about 6 months, and it is the most incredible self-reflective conversations. They really are all about me. But rather than, the thing is that sometimes the all about me conversations in isolation don't serve me very well, because I can get into the what's not working, and then I can see the pattern of what's not working. And so I think sometimes it's really good to have a self-reflective practice, because that's what I'm going to say it is, with somebody that, just as Joan and Jeanie said tonight, asking the questions. Somebody is asking the questions, and that person isn't really so invested in what your responses are. They're just guiding your questions and your thinking. So I'm going to say, even though I meditated, I learned to meditate transcendental meditation when I was 17, and I practiced it for years and years and years and thought of it as a very self-reflective practice. I now believe that self-reflective needs to be far more of a conscious practice, far more, about metacognition really than, although, somebody that's probably a much better yogi than I am, they would tell you otherwise.
And I will say just quickly about Catherine, and just before Tim.
Almost Tim.
I know, almost. Sorry. I always have to do that. But I've the conversations that I've had with Catherine is sometimes they might just be so flighty and so short, but her words are never every word is so like precious and meaningful, and she might just say like one quick sentence and it be like a chapter and you're just like, yes, so I think getting somebody that can coach you, that can understand, that can think through experience and use her words so wisely is so great. So just a follow-up shout out to Catherine McNaughton.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, Tim, you're up.
Wow.
Reflective practice.
Yeah, well, I often I bounce back and forth, right? And I'm of the mindset that reflective practice should be about awareness, if that makes sense. Like, I meditate, but that's not reflective practice, right? Reflective practice for me is actually a mental exercise, and sometimes I leave it quite drained. And maybe I'm doing it wrong. I'm hit and miss on it too, like most everybody. But I try to write, I try to think, I try to ask myself really hard questions, right? And I'm a scenario builder, like I'm a systems thinker, so I'll draw stuff out. Like you've seen what I do. It's crazy.
I love your drawings.
But the thing that intrigues me about what you both just said that I don't do a lot of and wonder if I should do more of is reflective practice with another person, in the sense of being able to just verbalize it, right? And being able to just get it out of my head, right? And it's I know that when I do that with Marika, it's always valuable for me, because most times she doesn't really have a clue what the context or the actual scenario is, but she asks just the right questions to make me go, oh, I never thought about that, right? Or more often than not, she asks questions about me and my own heart and my own process. I'm like, yeah, okay. So, when you two talk about including an outside source in your reflective practice, that's intriguing to me, because I don't know if a lot of people think this, but I've always thought that reflective practice was just about me going off and taking a writing pad and some earbuds and spend some time thinking and reflecting and planning. But maybe it's more than that.
You know what, Tim? I did too until November, and now it's so interesting. Just even considering that, working with I guess a life coach, and since then I've heard so many people say, oh yeah, I've worked with a life coach for many years, and I'm just thinking of ways to stay really healthy through a long teaching career, when most of the time, or in instructional designer roles, and that it is a service. Leadership, it's a service. You're serving other people. If you're educating, this is really about other people. But taking care of yourself, I think, is, and how do you do that? And I agree with what Lucy said, having your people. I've said this so many times, and Chad included here as well. The conversations that we have, I honestly think they were the highlight of when we the COVID transition period. We were meeting once a week at least and having these conversations, hugely supportive. So I think that we do need people, and we don't need to bear all the burdens. We can make these things easier on ourselves.
And what you said, Tim, about your wife, like asking you, like that's the thing. Like, how can you be reflective? You don't sometimes know what questions to ask yourself. You need that other perspective to kind of help you be able to reflect and re-envision and rethink and re-strategize, because sometimes you just think that the way you're doing it should be the right way, and you get a bit locked in that. And so when you have the people that can just ask you a couple of questions, the smallest question, it can really shift your thinking, So I do think having that kind of framework is important. And when you have your people, they know what questions to ask. They've been there, or they experience it themselves. That and so that it's definitely part of the process, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. I think we'll end it there, and that's a good place to put a stamp on it. And so, for those of you listening, reach out to us through the Praxis Pedagogy website, praxispedagogy.com, or you can get in contact with us through LinkedIn or Twitter. All our information is there. So reach out to us. Tell us what you do for a reflective practice. Is it good? Has it been working? Have you found something better than what you were doing before? Do you think reflective practice is a waste of time? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And again, big shout out to Jean and Joanie for being on the podcast today. And I'm going to go cry. But
I'm going to go and read that poem again.
I'm going to listen to that about 1 million times. Dedicated to Lucy.
Yeah.
And,
oh my God. I'm gonna have that as my text message announcement. This is dedicated to Lucy.
Yes.
Oh, that's hilarious. Good deal. All right. Well, until next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Phil.